all the foreign agencies, all the foreign affairs decided we have to eradicate smallpox from the world. And it is achieved. We need to be proud of ourselves that development cooperation works. However, and on the same time, you can realize that, some countries say, let's see why smallpox worked and polio is still there. Polio is there because there are fightings in some countries. They're not able to put the polio vaccine in certain countries. So there is a weakest link also where, a few countries may decide. My own country, for example, in India, we still have polio cases. So there are a few weak countries in the whole chain of providing this network support. So if these few countries decide, that we need to provide this good, they can provide it, and that's a global benefit which everyone can get. But now moving again forward, we are reaching the world where problems are even more complex. We require multi-stakeholder action. Climate stability, even if Europe decides to cut down the emissions and US decides not to cut down the emissions, you're not going to get climate stability. If China doesn't decide to come in, India don't want to partner in it, we will not be there in the climate stability game. Financial stability, you require all the countries to have a surveillance mechanism where you really know what good each of the countries are providing. So that's the way the new challenges are to be dealt with, that every country will have to play their part in this aggregation method of producing the final development goal. So network cooperation is a must. We no longer can get away from it because no one country or agency can provide all the solutions. And secondly, more and more solutions require participation of more and more countries. And in terms of strictly mathematical way, the cost of inaction, the cost of not cooperating is definitely higher than the cost of cooperating. You look at climate change, right now you can spend probably, 600 billion adaptation fund and, to mitigate the activities, and it's going to save you, a couple of $1 trillion in future. A case of financial stability, why we lost $2 trillion right now, because there was no cooperation, in terms of banking systems, for example. So we are already seeing that the cost of action, cost of cooperation is far less than cost of not cooperating on development issues. So how is this cooperation happening in terms of the development agencies? On one hand, if you look at typically from the level of organizations, there is an OECD DAC framework. We have our friend John from here who can share more information about what is the OECD DAC framework. It brings together all the developed countries so that they are able to have some commonalities, guidelines on where their aid should be targeted. What should be the effectiveness of aid? What are the principles which aid should be based on? So that comes under the Paris Declaration, which is already a network framework based in Paris where, these development agencies are cooperating with each other. The new framework which is coming up is the South-South Cooperation Framework, China-Africa Forum. They held their third forum in Beijing in 2006, where they got all the heads of the state, all 53 heads of the state in Beijing, and China has increased the aid going to African countries by 3 times, for example. So already we can see, there are new forums which are coming up. There's a new cooperation forum called the IPSA, that's India, Brazil, South Africa Network. There's another framework coming out, BRIC, the Brazil, Russia, India, China. So you can see that, there is tensions, there are, there's rearrangements which are happening even within the cooperation agencies, so there is a danger that, again, that the old world is crumbling or the new one is not yet there, and we may go either way, depending on, what happens in between. But to, manage these two things, the UN in the ECOSOC part of the UN took an initiative to get all these development agencies, development actors together under the Development Cooperation Forum. That's the DCF, what we call Development Cooperation Forum, to bring traditional and non-traditional actors together. So there are, networking which is happening at the level of institutions to get institutions to align themselves. In terms of how these rainbow of colors are operating with each other, unfortunately, that kind of networking is not being observed. Or, it's happening in areas where it should not be, and, in areas where there should be more cooperation, it's not happening. Again, look at going from the bottom. Humanitarian aid, yes, development agencies have learned over time how to not to have their individual, humanitarian tents. There is a, place where, there is a convergence which is happening gradually. In terms of solidarity aid, yes, it's happening, but not enough. We still lack, there are a lot of countries which can benefit from solidarity aid, but it's not happening enough. Definitely on environmental issues, no, it's not really happening. And it's happening, but not enough. Look at climate change as one of the major issues that, a lot of the development cooperation agencies have simply failed to come up with this network approach that, look, this kind of a solution, this kind of a problem requires our collective solution, and that's not happening, or not happening to that level. The one which you cannot see, the yellow aid pilot development projects, is definitely not happening because lots of development agencies feel that, they want to have their individual projects at the country level. So you have competing projects, you still have, each agency is, moving towards its own goals. Again, in commercial aid, unfortunately, it's happening. Lots of cooperation agencies are coming together so that they can collectively give commercial aid to the recipient countries. But then there's a danger that if all the donors come together, the recipient countries will find it very difficult to bargain. I'm all in support of saying sometimes it's good that the donors don't cooperate because the recipient countries can then, bargain individually rather than having a collective interest of donor countries coming on the recipient countries. So, that's I'm going to point out in the dangers of too much networking in development cooperation also. The red aid is definitely happening. We have seen some of the Bretton Woods institution policies which have done disaster in developing countries also. So there is another, sometimes, important to realize when too much of cooperation among, push forwards a certain kind of a perspective or viewpoint which may not be the best interest of the recipient or the developing countries. In terms of development goals, yes, there is a gradual alignment. One of the best things is what Nath mentioned yesterday about the Millennium Development Goals. Lots of these development agencies are collectively going towards, deciding on what are the 8 key goals where they want to put the money in. There's a kind of a, thinking, which is coming up that these are the main issues we need to work on. Some of the other things which gradually, for example, some of the Scandinavian countries are coming up is on climate change. We need to have action. So, we need to go in for greener technologies. We need to go in for, environmental friendly technologies. Extreme poverty eradication, digital divide, as Nath from the Digital Solidarity Fund said, unfortunately, it's not happening. They are trying to push forward for a 1%, basic tax or 1% for resource generation, but still that is not being supported by the collective group of agencies, even though individually they may have an interest in promoting, digital bridging together. So it's a very interesting combination. In terms of tools, yes, in terms of tools, definitely there is a cooperation. There's a lot of cooperation which is coming in terms of what tools they're employing. In terms of research, for example, we have this World Bank funded, but, run Global Development Network, for example. Our friend Oleg also might be knowing about Global Development Network. It's trying to bring together research networks and institutions in developing countries, in different regions, together so that they can share their research together. They have selected some issue areas where collectively lots of these agencies can come together and pool the research and what are the conclusions coming up. You can always go to the website gdnet.org. The other one which is happening in terms of networking of institutions, we have a person from IICD also, it's the Global Knowledge Partnership, which is again a network of institutions rather than network of individuals. Institutions decide that they want to, have say in, for example, on knowledge management, for example. That's the Global Knowledge Partnership. It's a network of institutions, which is working apparently quite well.